Hello everyone, and welcome to our WatchBox roundtable discussion. We are here at Dubai Watch Week 2021 in the WatchBox booth with my friends, and today's topic is Beyond Switzerland with a focus on Lange. We have absolute experts on the topic, I guess, and here we have Elizabeth Doerr from Quill and Pets, my dear friend and a great collector, Michael Hickcox, and we have another dear friend, Mike Manjos from WatchBox. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's great to be here. Great topic.
Yes, I guess so. And I mean, since it is with me, it is going to be about Lange as usual. And since it's about Beyond Switzerland, I wanted to just start with and put the bomb in the middle. Is there a difference now in terms of quality, perhaps, between Switzerland and Germany?
Well, I'm going to let you take that one. I don't need to get in trouble with anyone.
How to upset 80% of the industry in one fell swoop.
Exactly.
Let's do it.
Bit of a rhetorical question. We'll put the blame on you. Because, no, and I think that's what put Lange on the map, even though, in fairness to Switzerland, I mean, it was, the management teams and a lot of intellectual property, a lot of team members from both Gégé, Lecoultre, and IWC that helped found or refound Lange in the early 90s. But the quality of the watch is terrific, without a doubt, and if not the best, then amongst the best in the world. I think you can point to plenty of other directions, which I'm sure we will. I mean, the thing like the Daniels escapement, coming from this little island between the UK and Ireland, and the work Roger Smith is doing. I mean, there's plenty of examples. Quality is not just in the purview of Switzerland these days.
Yes.
And if it helps, not long ago I was shooting the breeze about Lange with a good friend of mine who's an auction house expert, kind of the Lange expert at that particular auction house, and he said that Lange, having entered the scene, is what helped raise the quality in Switzerland. Now, these are not my words.
Yeah.
I can quote them.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't disagree with him that he said that finishing, the quartz crisis going into the 80s and 90s wasn't anyone's focus, right? Finishing, Switzerland was more about ingenuity, keeping a certain level, but finishing wasn't on people's radar. And then Lange came along. And that's really, it could be considered the finest most finely finished serial watch in existence. I think there would be a lot of people who might agree with that.
Yeah, I would say so. You?
100%. And I guess I got it as much the last time I was in Dubai Watch Week 2 years ago. We had an amazing visit. I was walking back from filming, and I'm looking in my booth, and I'm seeing this gentleman sitting in a chair from the back, and I'm like, that's Philippe Dufour. And I went running into the booth, and I introduced myself, and I sat down, and we just started talking, and finishing is what he's all about. And he would make the argument that Lange embarrassed some of what he's considered his homeland because they raised the bar on finishing. And it really got me, not only in finishing, but I used to go to Basel every year, went for 30-something years, and I just remember walking by this booth and going, what is that monster thing? It was, the Datograph, and just, it lit up that room, and you were like, there was nothing else from another manufacturer that existed at that time, be it Patek, be it AP, be it Vacheron. Everything they were doing, specifically in chronographs, we're probably digressing already, but was outsourced.
Yes.
And Lange did it in-house and at a finish level that was never higher.
Yes.
And at the time, I was a Patek dealer. So Patek was our bread and butter, but you would flip them over side by side, and it was hard to make the argument that the Lange wasn't finished better.
Yes. It was one of Lange's advertisements in 1997 that I believe was Langematic, and Günter Blümlein, wrote this thing from IWC. He used Da Vinci chronograph on one side. It was saying Swiss makes the best watches. And then there is the Langematic, so do the Germans.
So and he was really provocative with his advertising back then. Because we were all about print magazines at that time, so that's where the advertising was. But IWC was provocative too, but in a different way. But his idea was to grab people's attention and not let it go.
I think he had to, because let's be honest, I mean, back then, anybody who said, Germany and watchmaking, and especially East Germany, certainly wasn't thinking that it was going to be at that level. And I think they had to intentionally, and I think that was part of his vision, was he knew he couldn't make equal because nobody would take it seriously. He had to raise the bar.
Yes.
And I think that was the vision, was if I try to be Patek, I'm dead.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So every Lange to me from day one was not. It was its own thing. The finish was arguably better. It was more handwork, hand engraving. I mean, all the details that didn't exist as much in the serialized production of other brands was available in Lange.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
But I think internally his express goal was to try to topple the crown. To try to get up there and beat Patek at their own game.
Yeah, yeah. He has this interview with Peter Chong, I believe it was 1999, where Peter Chong asks him about, so are you going against Patek Philippe, or what do you think? And he was saying that, okay, so we are just two cavaliers fighting for the princess in mutual sportsmanship. So I can't say anything. Yeah, but I mean, it was more or less also I guess, with this advertisement and everything, part of a positioning strategy as well, rather than going head to head and trying to, create it from scratch. He was attaching it to an already existent thing and then, growing from there, which was absolute genius. But I mean, speaking of Blumlein, obviously we have to touch upon Walter Lange, right? And I wanted to ask you guys particularly as well, can you just tell us a bit more about Walter Lange's influence within Lange Söhne's foundation and the culture that he brought with him?
Yeah, well, it was really all his culture, the idea to do this. He never forgot his family heritage, his family legacy. And for all those years that he was stuck in West Germany, with the split, divided Germany, he burned to get back to that.
Yes.
And when the wall fell in 1989, and I remember this day like it was yesterday, everyone in Germany was just, it was unbelievable, the feeling and the feelings of joy and relief that went through everyone. And I've had Walter Lange tell me many times how he felt that day and how he knew immediately, this is my chance. I'm getting back there. I have to do this.
He had to do this.
He had to.
Yeah.
And it was his good luck that he met Günther Blumlein, because that man was a genius.
Oh, yeah.
And the company culture is really a good mix of the two of them, I would say. Walter Lange's legacy and heritage and really penchant for precision and making everything just so. And Günther Blumlein's his visionary business acumen, how to start a brand, how to keep a brand and make it a brand, not just a few watches, but an actual brand. And he knew how to do it. Yeah. He pulled IWC and Jaeger up out of their whatevers and, out of the quartz crisis, and he took all that knowledge and experience and just threw himself into Lange.
Yes.
I think Walter Lange was as important as Blumlein is, critical to the story.
Yeah.
Blumlein had, unfortunately, this very untimely passing in 2001, really when he was just getting going in the prime of his life, and just unbelievably tragic.
Yes.
I think emotionally, culturally, Lange, a lot of the other companies related, they were really hurt. And Walter Lange was able to help bridge that period of time, and also, quite frankly, to teach the next generation that came in, because a lot of Lange management came in
later.
Yes, and they didn't know Blumlein, and Lange was able to teach them what the spirit was, and to bridge that.
Yeah.
And don't forget, he was 66 when they refounded the company. And most people are retired.
I was just going to say, he wasn't a spring chicken,
No.
but he was there, and it was his heart that you could feel come through. And the one thing that to me is always special about Lange is when you go there is a very different feeling that culture has permeated that entire company.
Yes.
And the pride that of the rebuilding of East Germany. I mean, they put Lange on a pedestal that's at another level in that whole area.
Yeah.
And it was his vision to do that, but he somehow was able to share that vision and spread it. You get a lot of visionaries who are one person and that's it. Mm-hmm. And even after Blumlein left us, it continued and grew.
Yeah. And Walter Lange represented that continuity to the past, right?
Correct.
Direct DNA lineage, the family matter. And what Blumlein was fighting against and taking on the Swiss is what Walter Lange represented, right? Because this idea that watches are Swiss is a modern construct, right? That's
Right.
sort of...
No, we always had English, we always had French.
Yeah,
we
sort
always
of
had,
1850s to 1950s when the Swiss dominated.
Yes.
Previously, the industry was so... it was all over Europe.
Yeah.
Germany, England,
They
France.
say the first watch came from Germany.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, Breguet is synonymous with Paris, although he's spent some time in Switzerland, obviously.
Right.
But Walter Lange represented the tie to that past and the legitimacy that enabled them to reestablish the brand.
Yeah. He was so proud when they restarted. They had started from zero. They had nothing. They didn't even have buildings anymore.
Yes.
In Glashütte, they had to fight to buy back all their own buildings.
Yes.
And when they started, they hung up signs all over the city to look for watchmakers and people to populate the fledgling factory. And he was always so proud. People would come in. They would have a little watch with them. This was my mother's, my father's, my grandmother's, my grandfather's. They made this when they used to work here with your predecessors, with your lineage, with your family. And he was always so proud, and he recounted these stories. He knew all of their names. He knew all of those historical people. He knew everything always. He never forgot. And the most important thing always for him was this love of Glashütte and its people. It wasn't just what his family did, but everyone's family, that everyone was okay and cared for.
Yes.
It was very important to understand that is so inherent to the company culture there, that it's not just about one or two people, but everyone.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's the livelihood of the whole city.
Yes.
And without
watchmaking now, I mean, it's now you go there. I mean, again, I had been there 20-something years ago, and you see it today, and it's completely changed because there's so many now German companies that are manufacturing right on the street.
They're actually out of room within the city limits.
I know. Well, there's only one light. I mean, it's not that big.
It's a bit of a problem. The poor mayor is always trying to shuffle.
But yeah, I mean, they still have that culture, and the thing that you just described about their grandfathers, their fathers was working there, and for example, a dear friend of mine working at the complications department, his father is working at Lange since 1994, and probably his kid is going to work at Lange someday, and this creates a unique family feeling within that company, which you can immediately realize when you go in, right?
Well, the other thing that you immediately realize, or the first time I went, was how young everybody was.
Oh, yeah.
Because, again, I've been to Paddock, I've been to Audemars, I've been to Vacheron, and, you go to the complications department, and there's a traditional gray-haired old gentleman who looks like he's been there since the beginning of time. And then you go to Lange, and I remember the, kids working on the turbograph were, 27 years old.
Yes.
And, this is the most complicated piece that anybody was really making at the time. And
absolutely.
It was kids working
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, they had to restart, right? They had to retrain. They were grabbing the kids right out of watchmaker school and coming in. And so many of those talented kids went through Lange's apprenticeship programs.
Yes.
Marco Lang, Mirko Heine, just to name two. I mean, so many of them. I meet watchmakers all over Switzerland. Oh, I got my start at Lange. I go to Grübel Forsey. There's at least 3 of them there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a legacy that continues and follows the entire industry.
Yes.
Like
I
it
mean,
or
Gail
not.
Peterman as well.
Yes, exactly.
Torsteline, etc. I mean, many talents. But just circling back to again Walter Lange, reading his memoirs, I remember that in 1994 he mentions that day and the moment as the most stressful time of his life. Right before the lady who is still working there pulled out the curtain, from the Lange one, etc. And he was wondering what's the crowd about. Obviously, everybody applauded, and we know the story of how 123 watches just gone, right? But what I wonder is, how was the reaction from the collector side, and how did you see it? How was it from the press side?
It hit like a bomb. It was within Germany. Of course, this is the home market. I mean, Lange wasn't forgotten, because at that time in the early '90s, a lot of the press. I was very rather young at that time. A lot of my colleagues were a generation ahead of me. They didn't come from the journalism side. They were all old collectors who had spent all the quartz crisis time in the Renaissance time buying, selling, trading pocket watches, right?
Pocket watches was all it was.
That's all it was at the time. And so they dropped these 4 watches into that community, and it was just head exploding. No one could believe it. And it was so what's the word I'm looking for? It was so, in German we would say gewagt. It was absolutely daring, and you know, this asymmetrical Lange one. Everybody's like, what is this? Hadn't been asymmetrical watches to that point.
The big date, the asymmetrical. It was provocative with the designs,
completely.
and the finish as well.
And this asymmetrical Lange one is the watch. It's the flagship of not only Lange, but look at what all came after it.
Yes.
Everyone does it now. Everyone did it right away.
Yeah.
They wanted to copy the success because the collectors thing could not stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
I mean, in the U.S. it was much the same, but it rolled out very differently because I don't think it was an icon like it was in Germany, and it wasn't a symbol of reunification and the rebirth either. It was more something you saw, and it just kind of hit you. And I mentioned to you yesterday that. I was in bed. I was reading a watch magazine, as one used to do.
Yes.
Of course, always waiting for them to come. Absolutely.
Or at least a paper watch magazine.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
there was a little ad, and it was a third or a quarter of the page. It wasn't even a full page ad because they didn't have money for it. Back then. And it was a picture of the Lange one, and because it was asymmetrical in this big case, it really hit you. And then of course. There were so many other things that were just right on trend with that watch. The sapphire case back that wasn't always on the watch, but these were not quite usual at the time because who wanted to look at the movement, right?
There wasn't much to look at.
Often wasn't that interesting. The movement was so small. This was a big movement. Of course, blue steel screws. Other decorative elements were just so shocking.
The German silver, not to forget, no one had done that up to that point. It was only in pocket watches. It was completely new.
Yes.
Yeah, the use of a two-barrel power reserve, and which gave you 72 hours. I mean, this was kind of unheard of at the time. And then, of course, the big date, which was marketed at the time as being inspired by the Opera House in Dresden. But I think, given the smiles here, we all know that it was invented by Jaeger-LeCoultre, and Blumlein took it and said, "We're going to use this at Lange."
Giving away all the secrets. It was a great story, though.
But kudos to him for saying, "Wow, this is one of these 5-10 elements that we can build a brand around," which has been so transformative in the industry. Maybe we take it for granted now because you see it in other watches.
Sure.
But then it was so huge.
Absolutely.
I think also the Lange one was, if you think back, like now we see it as a normal size, normal thickness, but at the time it was competing with a 3919. Which was a very delicate, hobnail, thin, gentleman's watch. And here you had this relatively heavy.
Yes.
They didn't try to design. It was like solid. It was like closing the door of your BMW. It was like a thunk. That came on the market, which initially in the U.S. wasn't the biggest hit.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Without a doubt, from a retail standpoint,
Okay.
there was only 2 retailers in the U.S. at the time, and it was Cellini and Wempe.
Yeah,
in the
3
Germans.
points of sale, all in Manhattan.
Correct, all in Manhattan.
That's right.
So it didn't really spread right away.
Yeah.
And it was a little quirky by those days' standards. It wasn't your traditional dress watch. At the time, it was either, you had a day-date Rolex, or you had a Patek 3919. It was kind of your gentleman's watches.
Right.
And you'd have a sport and a dress, and maybe you had a 3940 if you were getting into high watchmaking. But this was just so outside of the norms of the times. And people forget, because now it's such a broad market, that these all seem normal, but there really wasn't that at the time.
Wow. Interesting.
Dufour with his simplicity and Roger Dubuis were both doing watches only in 34 or 37
34s, exactly.
millimeters.
That's what I'm saying.
And this is 38 and a half.
38.5, yeah.
And if you just think about 34 versus 38 and a half, I mean, these watches looked huge, almost unwearable, and it took a number of years before the industry went into the 40s, where all of a sudden people started to say, well, actually, this is a really nice size, actually. I'm not going to go into the 40s maybe, or I'll do it for a sports watch, but But for a dress watch, this is 38, 39 is perfect.
I'm going to say, in fact, that it was until about 1999 when Panerai came out that people accepted that as a smaller watch.
Yeah.
You're right. It was a large watch for the time.
Yeah.
And it was solid, and it's a little bit thicker because of that beautiful movement with 2 barrels.
Oh, yeah.
But, I put it on my wrist, and I was in my 20s. I was like, that's a grail for me. it took me a long time to be able to afford one, but that was, for me, that was the grail. That was the thing I had to have before I leave this planet.
Yeah.
Same with the Datograph in '99. This was viewed as being
that's what
massive
really
watch.
changed. That's what changed it to me.
Yeah.
Because again, walking through Basel, I remember I can see it like it was yesterday, right there on the window on the right side, and was when they was at Basel, and it was just that was the thing. It was like, whoa, this is from Germany. They made it was hard not to take, and everybody took notice.
Yes.
I mean, that's really when the world changed.
Right.
Yes.
Because again, you took that and then compared it,
Yes.
to the Patek's of the day,
Right.
the 3970 specifically. It's,
Right.
it was just night and day.
Yes. I guess we could say that the Datograph, for example, it shifted the paradigm in the watch industry, so to speak, right? But continuing from the 94 again, up until what we saw afterwards, we saw 1815s, we saw Langematics, we saw cabarets, we saw Emil Lange moon phases, right? And but when you look at those pieces, remove the logos, and there are some elements, right, that you can immediately say, okay, so this is an Lange Söhne watch.
Right.
And what are those elements that you think that make the watch?
Well, I remember talking to the designers. There was a head designer, and he had a little team, and they had a specific set of criteria that they applied to every watch. And one of them was, and it sounds like such a ho-hum thing now, but no one was thinking about this, the golden ratio.
Yeah,
It was specifically the golden ratio that they started with. There was the large date with that specific type font.
Yeah.
That must be used as much as possible, et cetera, et cetera. So there were certain design elements that Blue Line really put down and dictated that we need people to understand every single time this comes from our house and nowhere else.
Yes.
I think the 3/4 plate, although
Without a
maybe
doubt.
it wasn't
Movement,
completely required, they moved away from it in various watches, but no one else was using this in wristwatches at the time, and this was a design element that then continued through so many of the watches that they would launch later on, and was very unusual, and then served as a canvas to show off the finishing as well.
And was widely copied.
Yeah,
Also by other German companies that came after. No one did it before them, but everyone did it after.
because it's not just pretty; it's performance, right? It's
Correct.
stability.
Stability.
Correct. And that was always the thing that they talked about as well, was it wasn't just decorative, everything they were doing. It was all the process to make it more accurate, to more reliable. And it just felt like you could do more in it than the other watches of the day.
Yes. But speaking of Blumlein again, his name is coming up from everything, right?
Right.
And can we perhaps say that Lange Söhne was rather a personal project for him at some point?
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
Yeah.
He likened it once, I remember talking to him, he called it a little flower that needed to be carefully tended in order to grow the right way.
Goodness.
And it was very personal for him. His friendship with Walter Lange was very personal.
Yes.
And you know how personal the entirety of this was for Walter Lange. It was definitely, it was their lives. It had taken their lives over by this point.
Yes.
Looking back, this was a bit of a renaissance in development of wristwatches, right? There had been the quartz crisis. Certainly, we had come out of it for a long time. There are many heroes in coming out of it, but he's certainly one of them. And I think he knew the moment. I think he knew he had a platform, and I think he took it very seriously and put himself into it.
Yes, I agree. Moving on to the watches again to a certain extent. So even after the passing of Blumlein, we see that his ideas were still utilized. Like we can say double split, right? We can say turbograph, which was actually started in 1990, but they couldn't make it at the time because they didn't have time. And after that, Zeitwerk was one of his sketches as well. They found in his drawers, etc. But moving on to complications again and again. I mean, we saw cabaret tourbillons with stop seconds mechanisms, and then the trip split is coming up. So what I wanted to ask you guys is, obviously there seems to be seemingly infinite amount of push on complications and innovation from Lange's side. Where does this coming from?
believe it or not, a lot of it still does stem from sketches and notes that Blumlein left behind.
Wow. Okay.
And not to forget that Tony DeHaas
I was gonna
started
say Tony.
working
Oh,
there.
yeah.
He's been there for 17 years.
Yes.
Or longer. It must be longer by now. He was there. He knew Blumlein.
Yeah.
He wasn't there at the same time. He was working with Renaud
Unfortunately,
Papy.
But he knew them. I was going to say he knew Blumheim very well.
Yeah,
from Renaud
exactly.
Papy. I mean, working.
He had already signed, but
Yeah.
not joined Renaud and
Right.
Papy. Blumlein said, "Come."
Oh yes.
Right.
And they met, and he said, "You're going to come and work for me." And he said, "But I've already committed. I can't turn these folks down." And he said, "No, you don't understand. We're going to do this chronograph."
Yeah.
And it was very painful for him to say no, but he had to say no.
Yes.
And then very poignant when he did join the company many years later.
Precisely that. You took the words right out of my mouth. So I think Tony very much works in the way that Blumlein wanted. He's very careful to stay in that same lane.
Yes.
And for all of them there, Tony's like the gatekeeper, right? He's the one that makes sure everybody follows Blumlein's protocols, but I don't think anyone would want to step outside of that. I think they'd all want to stick
No, they
to
have a
it
very clear path.
They
And I
do.
mean, I remember one of the first conversations, we had a training at Lange and at the academy.
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
with
Doing
my
the
class,
engraving
got
and
to
stuff.
do all that. But, we got to spend an hour kind of Q&A with
Yes.
Tony, and it
Yeah.
just turned into a back and forth of the two of us because I was drilling him and he was having fun. And I mean, just very poignant of what their vision was. And I remember asking him, I'm like, when's the minute repeater come? And he's like, I'll promise you it'll be special when it comes. I said, great.
Exactly.
I said, what about, an equation of time? He said, that's an Audemars complication. I said,
Yeah.
you just did an annual calendar. Isn't that a Paddock complication? And he had some choice words for me. It's only Tony could. We all laughed.
I think that the time in which the company was born, the 90s, was an era of complications. That's what reigned supreme. Not like today where it's about sports watches. It's about, we changed the dial. Look, a whole new watch.
It's
materials are so important today because so many of the complications have been done and rolled out, although we see crazy new ones, the crayon complication. We see everyone's about dead seconds now. There's so many interesting things going on. But back then, a new complication was so impressive. And so that got boiled into the DNA of the company. And you don't always have new complications in each launch. But Lange certainly is rooted in that, where they want to either solve new problems or solve existing problems in new ways.
Right.
Yes.
And more so than any other brand, certainly in the last 25 years, because if you look at the number of calibers in the period of time, it's not even close.
Yes.
And I mean, again, outside the box, Zeitwerk you brought up, you mentioned, I mean, that was totally, out of left field at the time.
So one of the things that I think they had to move away from some of their premises when they launched because some of them are too restrictive. One of them was every new watch we do, we're going to do a new movement.
Yeah.
And this is in massive contrast to, one of their brother companies that, is built around the 240 and the 315, and that's it, and yet does, 15 times as many watches a year, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a pet peeve of mine. I mean, and I'll say it all the time. I was like, we finally, it took you 30 years to come up with a new manual watch movement, really?
Yeah.
I mean,
really? And then another thing that I don't think I ever heard was really important, it was just kind of taken for granted, because in history it was always very important to have movements fitted to the case.
Yes.
And a lot of the industry, especially as watches got bigger, because of
didn't wanna make the
Blumlein
investment.
especially, they didn't want to make the investment and still don't. And
Yes.
so you see these windows very close to the center and all sorts of things that just show you that this is a really tiny old movement in a watch.
Yes.
But Lange's never done that, which I think is to their credit.
A good example to that is their 1815 collection, I guess. Starting from 35.9, they were using this L41, whatever the movement, 25 millimeters measuring, etc. And then they just 1815 grew like a teenager at 14 years old, immediately 40 millimeters in like 2007 or 6. And what we saw, the movements grew together.
Right.
It went up immediately. They never stopped and, put that, smaller movement into a bigger case. But again, that was, I guess, coming from Blumlein. So, so that's a good effect as well. But yeah, about the watches, I want to kind of dive into the, ladies' watches as well. So I mean, obviously, today, there is no distinction at all. I mean, perhaps apart from the size, we can't say that this is a ladies' watch, this is a man's watch, whatever. And what do you think of Lange's attitude, starting from the beginning towards the ladies' market?
Right. Well, just to clarify, a woman's watch is a watch that a woman owns. Period.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't matter what the brand puts on it, who it's for, it doesn't matter. That's my watch.
Yes.
If I own it. So, but interestingly, this is a big discussion today because we have a new association in our midst called WatchFem, which kind of grew up through the pandemic when people were at home and had time to think and work on things, which is currently shedding more light into how women feel about this and what we can do to be more inclusive and have more equality. But that's a little side note.
Yeah.
In Germany, things are generally unisex. If you look at the classic German brands, all of them, they don't have a ladies' division, a men's division. All of them. And Lange never did either. It was a watch.
Yeah.
It was never a men's watch or a ladies' watch. It was always just a watch.
Yes.
They did have the Arcade at the beginning,
Yeah.
which I know Walter Lange thought of as the ladies' watch, but it was never really marketed that way, and later we had the little Lange 1, which is a little bit smaller than the normal Lange 1. I understand that gets called a ladies' watch a lot, but if you visit Lange's website, it's not. It's just the little Lange 1. It's
and
not.
I don't remember when it was launched. I remember more the reason for it being launched was that in different parts of the world.
I was just saying, I think they intended it for the Asian market. Obviously, they thought-
Precisely, yes.
Exactly, for the Japan, most.
If we're going to be more,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
That was the reason that was actually
Correct.
given.
Yep.
That customers requested, mostly from the Asian market. But that has tradition in Germany. That things are made just for people to enjoy.
Yeah,
It doesn't
got
matter
it.
who it is.
Got it.
It's funny, when we were selling them, one of the most popular watches we would sell to women was the Cabaret.
Wow.
And when the Cabaret Moon came out, it was a great looking ladies watch.
Yeah.
I mean, it really wore well.
Yeah.
You put a fun color strap on and it was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, market research has shown that women tend to buy more shaped
Correct.
watches, and
Yeah.
men tend to not wear the shaped watches. So I'm not surprised. I actually adore the Cabaret. It's a beautiful watch.
Oh, yeah.
I do think, though, the brand has, obviously it had the original Arcade, which later on they expanded in size, and it was pretty small at first, and the original Saxonia was 34 millimeters.
Right.
I think that was very much a unisex watch or something
Absolutely.
a lot of women certainly wouldn't feel uncomfortable wearing. I do feel like they've maybe catered or opened it up and launched more towards maybe watches with more unusual colors, dials, and certainly a lot more gems. And maybe these are somewhat targeted towards women, but they're just so unbelievably beautiful that I think that now a lot of men feel comfortable wearing these as well, especially in different parts of the world. We're sitting in Dubai, where I think wearing a watch with gems on it is much more common for men. And some of these watches, the new Lange 1 with the kind of the blue dial and the diamonds on it. I mean, that's just
Drop dead.
unbelievable.
Oh, you mean the Aventrine?
Yeah,
the Aventrine dial.
Yeah.
And do you know that I've had a lot of discussions with them over these Aventrine pieces. They were literally launched as unisex pieces, and more men are buying them.
Yes.
No,
And I've seen in your groups, in the WatchBox groups, men.
I move them a lot.
Yeah.
That's a great dial, and almost exclusively to men.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I think the whole point of breaking down this men's and watches world is because a beautiful watch is a beautiful watch, and if someone's drawn to wear it, then great. And women shouldn't be barred from wearing what they want, and men shouldn't be barred from wearing these things that they want.
Yeah.
It's more about the marketing, I think, because think about it. If you loved Cartier and you saw one of those quirky shaped cases and you just wanted to wear it, but it says it's a ladies' watch on the website, how would you feel about buying that? As a man, you might, I don't know, but I assume you might feel a little funny about that.
Yeah.
And I think that's the crux of the discussion, is that you're kind of barring part of our society from the desire, or making it a guilty pleasure, I guess,
Yeah, I think size is another similar thing there, because I mean sometimes Patek launched a pilot's watch, and then in 41, and then a couple of years ago they put it on 37.
Right.
And they said at the time, this is a ladies' watch. And
They
a lot
did.
of people complained about that because it was perfect for men who don't like to wear such a big watch.
Right.
And I think there's recognition that a lot of guys have small wrists and a lot of guys have big wrists, and their taste in watch is not wholly dependent on the size of the wrist, but for a lot of people it does form a viewpoint about how big they want. Lange for a long time was making watches, the whole industry you could argue, that were too big in my opinion, especially a lot of the complicated watches and the 31 especially. I mean, I don't know if there's anyone who's big enough in the world
That's a
to
monster.
actually
Maybe The
wear
Rock.
this watch.
I will admit, I mean, I guess I have a very big soft spot for the 31, only because
he does.
I remember
For some
when I went to the launch, and they wheeled out this watch, literally, because they had to wheel it out. It was so heavy and big. But the guys came out with it, and it looked like they hadn't slept in months. And I mean, they were so proud of it, and it was so impressive at the time.
Yeah.
And literally, the last time I went to Lange, I happened to have one in the case, so I borrowed it and wore it and pulled it. And Tony's like, "Okay, what do you wear?" And he rolled it up, and he's like, "You're an ass." Yes, I am. I absolutely love it. And I have one over in the case today because I think I'm the one guy on the planet who still loves them and thinks they're amazing. And it's almost unwearable because it's a hockey puck.
It's a hockey puck.
It's a hockey puck, but it's incredible.
The industry's been drawn towards sameness and wearing the same watches, and social media pushes people in the same direction. This is clearly a very bad thing. And the thing that variety is the spice of life, right? Makes the world
my
go
other
round.
favorite one, it's funny because I'm the opposite guy. Double split is like my dream.
So
I mean,
this
I
is a
think
gr-
that's an incredible watch to wear, and I would carry it as soon as...
It's a great example of my point because when that came out, I loved the concept. I loved everything about it except the size.
Yeah.
And of course, it came out in platinum only, and so it's a very heavy watch
Right.
as well. Now, very funny, 10 years later, I feel very comfortable wearing that watch, but I didn't when it was
First
launched.
came out,
And
yeah.
a lot of Langes for a number of years, in my opinion, were too big for me personally.
Yes.
But I think since then, you look at the new split that they did. Was it last year or 2 years ago?
The triple split.
No, the black
Ratchet-
dial.
Oh,
yeah.
the anniversary Ratchet.
Yeah. I mean, that's what is that? 39 maybe. I mean,
It's a 39.
perfect size. So there's been a retrenchment in size that I'm super excited about
Yeah.
to see where that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. They are getting, I guess, as time progresses and as they are I'm going to use another manufacturer slogan, but mastering complications to an extent.
Never heard that.
I guess they are getting better and better at making things much more compact, much more wearable, etc. I guess triple split is a very good example of that. When they added another complication, extended the power reserve, but it's the same size. So it's going on and on. In your remark about the minute repeater thing, obviously I asked Tony about that many times too, and he answered me the same way, saying that we're gonna do it, but in our way. I don't know when it's gonna come out, but this is one aspect that I admire with Lange. They are very much willing to develop in every area, starting from minute repeaters for ground complication. And then we saw an extraordinary application of that, minute repeater complication with Zeitwerk. And now, I mean, at some point we're going to see one, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be fascinating compared to what other guys are doing.
But you brought up a really interesting point, Michael, with how things changed. What I find with them, and this is I love because I don't think every company does it this way, they are constantly working to improve what they've already done.
Yeah,
Correct.
So they won't just throw the Lange one out there and that was the end of it. They continue to improve it. They made a whole new movement with one spring barrel, same power reserve. For example, then there's the Daymatic. They didn't just throw a rotor on there and call it good. They completely re-engineered the thing. Or the Zeitwerk. They've been re-engineering the Zeitwerk movement this entire
Many
time.
times, yeah, because they weren't satisfied. It wasn't quite good enough for what they wanted it to be.
Right.
Power reserve wise,
Yeah.
Right.
They say same for Datograph as well, I guess.
Yeah, and I think this is what makes one of the many, many things that makes Lange so collectible.
Yes.
Because you can both understand these differences over time, and then you might have a preference of,
Yes.
okay, I want the Lange one with the instantaneous date, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or I want to without, you know. I've had for a long time a Lange-matic Perpetual on my shopping list.
Push
you know,
button,
they
no
had a
push
push button and versus no push button. And exactly. I desperately want the push button, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, the nerdy side of it, I guess, is, you know, we have in the Datograph. I have a friend who was telling me, I want a Datograph first generation, but with the oldest flyback spring. I mean, where the hell does it come from? You know, obviously they changed it at some point.
Yeah.
And you know, when he's looking at the loop, he recognized that, you know, that spring is different. So he wants the curved one, not the flat one. So collectability, I guess. But you know, to wrap it up, perhaps, I mean, we are fans of the brand for many years, I guess. What would you like to see for future? You know, I might ask.
Well, if it was up to me, I would hope they continue bringing out these Handwerkskunst pieces, which are some of my favorites, my personal favorites. The newest one, the Cabaret Tourbillon, with the Handwerkskunst dial, with all these added artisanal touches on the dial. I think that's a fantastic way to do that. Make, you know, limited because it takes so long to do them, but
yes.
But you know, not just get rid of the Cabaret Tourbillon. Bring it back now and then with these beautiful artisanal dials. I would love to see this continue, and they're always thinking up new things to do with that.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'd say two things. One, around size, and we already talked about it. I'd love them to make watches in the upper 30s or around 40, not just 45 or something like that. The other is to have accessibility at all price points. Because one thing that's changed in the 25 years I've been a collector is that the prices have gone to the moon, right?
Yes, they have.
And the high complications come out, and you know, at €500,000, that's you know, beyond my price point. So to see interesting things at other price points is really great. I was lucky enough to get the Odysseus, which is a terrific price point, very difficult to get, partially as a result. But that's such a great sign that they're still interested in doing things at many different levels.
Yes, yes. I mean, I'm sorry to, I'm going to come back to you definitely, but sorry for you guys as well. I got to ask, you know, what you mentioned is a good point. So from 1994 up until 2010 or so, when I say Lange Special Edition, I guess we can think of Lange-matic Anniversary, which was a very accessible price point back then. And we can talk about Referenzur, we can talk about, you know, Lange Wempe Gang Reserve, etc., etc. These pieces were special editions in a, you know, with a new movement, with a new design at an accessible price points. And then from 2010s up until today, perhaps, we don't see such special pieces at accessible ranges, but rather at Handwerkskunst, right, at Lumen range, etc. I mean, don't you think that, you know, perhaps it should come back, or am I wrong with my assessment?
No. What I wanted to see, and well, there's two things I want to see. One is, the first is, you know, what you're wearing today.
Yeah.
Stone dials, specialty dials. We used to get many interesting colors. We used to get short runs of, you know, we talk about it all the time. You know, the gray dials, the blue dials, the black dials in different materials and colors. Just freshen it up and just interesting short runs. But again, at a very reasonable price point, and makes it different. I would love to see more stone dials.
Yes.
I mean, could you imagine a Lange one, Tiger Eye, Malachite, Lapis? Let's do it. I mean, let's have some fun. I mean, it would be incredible. Could you imagine?
No, I'm having trouble imagining.
But I mean, sign me up. And then the other thing is, again, I want to be surprised again, because every time. I mean, I remember going to Berlin for Zeitwerk.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was one of the most amazing evenings of my life, just because the product was so out there, the event was so out there, the whole thing was so different than anything you'd ever done. And no, I never thought I needed that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know what I need. I'm not as good as they are at this.
Yes.
So I don't know what I want. I want them to show me what I want. And I think that's what Lange's done so many times.
Fantastic.
I wasn't looking for a double split. I wasn't looking for an Odysseus. I wasn't looking for all these things. But they gave them to me, and now I love them.
Very nice point. Yeah, very nice point. Yeah, thank you very much for joining. It was an absolute pleasure.
As always.
I learned a lot, to be honest. So thank you all for coming and thank you all for watching.